The Jewish Channel's Week in Review, serving tapas Jewish-style, Hasidic art, new faces at Jewish delis, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. The Jewish Channel can report this week a shocking revelation about ultra-Orthodox leaders putting their children's health in the way of governmental action. We'll get to that revelation in a moment. But first, the news of ultra-Orthodox leadership and children's health made by the New York Times last week. In a series of two in-depth stories, the Times investigation revealed first that victims of molestation who report the crimes to police are shunned and intimidated within the ultra-Orthodox community. The Times story recounts the claims of multiple individuals who were persuaded by rabbis not to go forward with filing charges and who faced significant harassment to the degree that they did so. In a second piece, the Times follows up on concerns that Brooklyn District Attorney Charles Hines is playing by a different set of rules in pursuing ultra-Orthodox molesters and other criminals. The story gets to the heart of the matter of recent arguments. Hines claimed that he has arrested some 95 ultra-Orthodox individuals in recent years as part of a task force called Kol Tzedek to address these crimes, while Hines at the same time says he won't reveal the names of those arrested for fear of identifying the victims. Here's what the Times had to report. The Times determined the names of suspects and other details in 47 of the 95 cases attributed to the Kol Tzedek program. More than half of the 47 seem to have little to do with the program, according to the court records and interviews. Some did not involve ultra-Orthodox victims, which the program is specifically intended to help. More than one-third involved arrests before the program began as early as 2007. Adding to the point is rabbinic interference in pressing charges, and what ultra-Orthodox leaders say is Hines permitting that interference. The second article opens, an influential rabbi came last summer to the Brooklyn District Attorney Charles J. Hines with a message. His ultra-Orthodox advocacy group was instructing adherent Jews that they could report allegations of child sexual abuse to district attorneys or the police only if a rabbi first determined that the suspicions were credible. The pronouncement was a blunt challenge to Mr. Hines' authority, but the district attorney expressed no opposition or objection, the Rabbi Chaim Davids-Wiebel recalled. The district attorney responded to the allegations in an op-ed in the New York Daily News, in which he mostly dodged the allegations, but did specifically say, quote, "The suggestion that I have ever condoned the practice of first seeking a rabbi's advice before an Orthodox Jewish community member reports sexual abuse is a distortion of my record." The strength of that claim is somewhat diluted by a lawyerly tack in the next sentence, where Hines says, "I have never suggested that someone seeking the advice of a rabbi is then relieved of the obligation of reporting sexual abuse to the appropriate authorities." But moving on to new facts that TJC can reveal about ultra-Orthodox leaders and their interaction with government over child safety. As you may know, there is a controversy within the Orthodox community over ultra-Orthodox practice regarding circumcision. Traditional Jewish practice for at least hundreds of years is to have some blood sucked from the circumcision wound, which rabbis at the time declared was beneficial for the baby's health. Unfortunately, that practice used to be done with direct oral suction, which modern medical experts know can lead to infection. Though direct oral suction is only done by very few, mostly Hasidic mohels, New York City health officials claim that at least 2 babies in the past decade have died, and several more have had severe impairment as a result of herpes simplex infections from that version of this ritual. I conducted a 2006 investigation for the forward of the handling of this issue by city and state governments, but there were some details I could not report at the time. Most specifically, city officials shared with me off the record the discussions between the rabbis and the city health department, which they did not let me report then for fear of identification. They've now freed me to do so, and the key detail is this. City health officials, led by then New York City Health Commissioner Tom Frieden, who is now director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, wanted to conduct a public awareness campaign to let parents of newborns know about the increased risk of direct oral suction as opposed to more common methods among the Orthodox, which are indirect. The response from Hasidic leaders to that suggestion was that if such a public awareness campaign were implemented, Hasidic children would no longer be brought to city hospitals. City health officials were now faced with the threat of immense additional health risks to all Hasidic children if they conducted the public awareness campaign, and so they relented. Moving on to a very different story about the Hasidic world, Christian Needon has a story about a new Hasidic art gallery.
A new high-end art gallery in the heavily Hasidic Crown Heights neighborhood of Brooklyn is celebrating the work of a contemporary master of Judaic painting, Itzhak Holtz. The owner of bestseller gallery, Shmuel Poltman, gave the Jewish Channel a preview of the gallery's exhibition of drawings and watercolors by Holtz, which will be on display through June 10th. Poltman also explained why Jewish painters who focus on high-quality depictions of Jewish life are so rare at the moment.
Paintings, on the whole, we've come very late to it in the Jewish world. Most art was silver, utilitarian, a Kiddush cup, a sum holder, spice box. The reason is Jews were either on the run, there may have been some issues with graven images and so on. So paintings really never developed in the Jewish world. It came along much later. Obviously it had to do with affluence and so on.
Poltman specializes in Hasidic art, which he sees as a subcategory of Judaic art, and dealt in such works for many years at his old location in Borough Park. He said that he views Holtz as part of a line of Judaic painting masters whose works are sought out by Jewish collectors.
There were some very great Jewish artists like Moritz Gottlieb and Isidor Kaufmann. These were famous artists who were really at the forefront of depicting Jewish life in Europe. And that became they became highly collected and sought after, their work. So this is basically an extension of that. And today, when I believe people have enough Kiddush cups and spice boxes and menorahs and so on, I think at this point people were looking to decorate their walls as well.
To see more from the Itzhak Holtz exhibition, now on display through June 10th, please tune into the full broadcast edition of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Christian. In another new approach to Jewish tradition, Meredith Gansman checks in with the new face of the Jewish deli.
Jewish delis are a very old tradition in New York, but today it's the young faces behind the counter keeping this cuisine alive and relevant. While the New York restaurant scene focuses on what's next and what's coming, deli food is a taste of nostalgia. Once staples of Jewish neighborhoods, many of the delis that now remain are relics of the past. But there's been a rebirth for the delicatessen, with a younger generation forging the way.
So the Jewish deli might be at one of the strongest moments it's ever been at today. But a lot of the cultural institutions, the deli as secular synagogue, the deli as an anchor in a community, it's just not the same as what it once was in the 1920s or the 1950s.
Jeffrey Yoskowitz, a food and culture writer, explained that the new take on deli food is part of a larger culinary trend of revisiting old-fashioned cooking.
But it's practicing, getting down to the simple, elemental foods. And in some ways, there's nothing more elemental and simple than Jewish deli. It's also the focus on well-sourced foods, on homemade, on home pickling, on the do-it-yourself movement. It all came together for younger Jews, my generation, people who grew up eating these foods, who grew up with their families talking about them, who looked around and said, how come no one has made our food relevant again?
Noah Bermanoff and Ray Cohen own Mile End Delicatessen in Brooklyn, New York. Inspired by the delis they grew up with in Montreal, Canada, they hope to reintroduce the cuisine for sophisticated New York foodies.
I think on paper a lot of Jewish food sounds really bland and uninteresting, but in actuality there's so much talent in the city as far as cooking talent to not take advantage of all this sort of like long storied tradition of cooking and of food among Jews. It seems like a shame.
We're sort of rethinking a lot of recipes that we've inherited from our grandparents, and that is an important part of moving the conversation forward in terms of like Jewish food culture. Taking these recipes and then thinking about them within the context of the Brooklyn food scene, which is to source as locally as possible and to, craft everything from scratch.
Another young face of the New York deli scene is Jake Dell, fifth-generation owner of the 124-year-old deli institution, Katz's Delicatessen.
I had my bar mitzvah here, so I grew up here. I mean, there's a neon sign right over there.
Raised in the deli business, Dell has watched the industry change.
Even on this block alone, there were 6 delis, and that's going back as recent as 50 years ago.
To see how younger generations continue to smoke, cure, and pickle, tune into the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Meredith. Another look at novelty in Jewish cuisine has Rebecca Honig-Friedman sharing a Spanish Sephardic new restaurant.
Ceviche, guacamole, steak a la cazuela. This is not typical kosher menu fare, but this isn't a typical kosher restaurant. I'm here at Ladino Tapas Bar and Grill in New York, a new Latin fusion restaurant doing kosher food like no other. Tapas is a Spanish culinary concept, a variety of snacks or small appetizers traditionally served as an accompaniment to a glass of wine.
On the tapas, you have cold, hot, meat, vegetarian, ceviches, all kind of different style of cooking, spicy, not spicy.
Chef Alexander Petard is not Spanish or Jewish, but as a third-generation French chef, he was exposed to Spanish food early on.
My dad always liked, going vacation in Spain. We went many times in Spain, Portugal. We have a lot of friends all over around, in Europe.
And working under some of the best chefs in New York City, Chef Petard learned about lots of different types of cuisines, including high-end kosher restaurants. So when he had the opportunity to open his own restaurant, he said, a kosher tapas bar made economic sense.
Because the rate of success for kosher restaurants is higher than non-kosher restaurants.
And the tapas concept allows for smaller plates, making dishes more affordable and thus more appealing to locals not necessarily looking for kosher food. The menu also goes beyond Spanish food, including dishes from all over the Latin world. And back in the Ladino kitchen, Chef Petard shows us how he makes an assortment of tapas, an entree, and even dessert. To see how Chef Petard whips up these exotic tapas dishes, watch the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Rebecca. Finally this week, we all think about the difficulties of achieving Israeli-Palestinian peace, but one congressman seemed to think it would take an actual miracle involving raising the dead. Pennsylvania Republican Joe Pitts received a constituent letter a year ago asking him to be more even-handed on the topic of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The letter writer is the father of a blogger at Mondoweiss, a far-left Jewish-run site about Israel. Well, when the congressman finally wrote back, his suggestion was pretty astonishing. With the global war against terrorism, the congressman's letter said, it is now incumbent on Prime Minister Ariel Sharon and Palestinian Authority Chairman Yasser Arafat to clamp down on Palestinian extremists that have perpetuated violence and to restart a peace process that has collapsed. Of course, though Congressman Pitt's letter was dated April of this year, Yasser Arafat died in 2004, and Ariel Sharon has been in a coma for 6 years. As it happens, the congressman is probably correct that if we could today get Arafat and Sharon to meet across a negotiating table and hammer out a peace agreement, that might well lead to peace. That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable. Time Warner Cable Channel 528, IO Optimum Channel 291, RCN Channel 268, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, Cox Channel 1, Frontier Communications, and now on Comcast Cable in the on-demand menu under Premium Channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.